In this video, I want to examine whether Lightroom can be the only software you'll need for all of your photo processing and photo library management. I've been using Lightroom for close to 20 years now, and it's where I do about 95% of my editing. So the question becomes, do you even need Photoshop anymore in 2025? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on how complex your editing needs are. So I'm going to show you 5 things you can do in Photoshop that you still can't do in Lightroom, and then you can decide if you still need Photoshop or not. So let's jump in. So number 1, advanced layer-based editing. So Photoshop layers let you stack, blend and mask multiple images or adjustments. Now here's an example where I've taken a simple image of a tree and overlaid textures, other images, color adjustment layers, quite a layer stack. I simply couldn't accomplish this in Lightroom. And I can show you the composite parts as I step up through the layers all the way from the simple tree on the bottom layer. So Photoshop really lets your imagination run wild. I think of it as the Swiss Army knife of photo processing software. Photoshop is also the go-to if you want to work with text on your images or apply all manner of effects or filters on an image. So number 2, content-aware fill and object removal. Lightroom has got a lot better over the last year with the inclusion of the remove tool, but Photoshop gives you more automated ways of object removal and the ability to manually fine-tune the results. Let's say you want to remove the tripods and this person from this hilltop. The remove tool is a good option as it attempts to keep the background consistent. So I just need to paint over the object or objects to remove and then hit the tick button or hit the enter key. And if you don't like what it's generated, you can undo and just try painting a slightly different mask, cover more area or less area. Or you can use one of the many manual methods to clean up, like the clone tool. I should also mention that Photoshop has many more ways of filling in areas of an image convincingly. For example, if I needed to extend this image at the sides and add some sky to the top, one of the ways I can do it in Photoshop is to use the crop tool. So after expanding the crop, I can choose to use content-aware or generative fill to extend the image area. I can enter a text description for what I want, although it may not be necessary for a simple crop extension. I can also choose from 3 variations if I don't like the first option that's generated, or I can generate it again until I'm happy with it. You do need to use these tools, however, with a bit of judgment. For example, I wouldn't use this sort of tool on an image where I'm wanting to accurately represent a place or location. So number 3, precision selections and masks. If we stick with this example, I'll show you a technique I use when the automated tools fail, and they do from time to time. So it's really good to have a fallback to manual methods, and that's what I particularly like about Photoshop. To remove the person and tripod, I use the lasso tool, selection tool, to select a large background area that I want to copy over the subjects to be removed. I convert that to a layer. I move the layer over the top of this objects and then line it up by lowering the opacity of that layer. Then once it's lined up, take the opacity back to 100%, add a layer mask and set to hide, and then start painting in the layer mask to reveal the layer I'm using to hide the subjects. Photoshop also has a pen or paths tool, which is really good for selecting objects with smooth edges. So take a look at this composite image here. If we isolate the Coke can, we can see it has been photographed on a plain but textured background. The pen tool's ideal for manually clear-cutting a smooth-sided man-made object. But once the path has been made, it can be converted to a selection and then a mask, and then the mask can be further modified with a fine brush or any of the other tools such as softening blurs. However, this isn't a tutorial on how to use these tools. I just wanted to illustrate what's possible, the manual level of control that's possible you have in Photoshop for when the automated tools fail, and you don't have this level of control in Lightroom. But let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a separate video on advanced Photoshop retouching, including some of these techniques. So number 4, creative compositing and artistic effects. I've sort of covered this in point 1, advanced layer-based editing. Suffice to say that you couldn't come anywhere near to playing with an image like this in Lightroom. What I haven't covered is the huge variety of filters that you can apply over images. So there are many ways of blurring or distorting an image, including motion blur, lens blur. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but you can just use these filters on parts of an image or use them in a more subtle way. At the very least, it's worth having a bit of a play and seeing what is possible. You never know when you might need a particular tool or filter to solve a specific problem that crops up. So number 5, high-end sharpening and noise control techniques. I have covered Lightroom versus Photoshop sharpening in a previous video, and I'll link to this in the description. But to recap, Photoshop provides many more methods of sharpening and a lot more granular control to really be precise about how you sharpen an image. In Lightroom, if you're outputting to a print or a file, you only have 3 levels of sharpening and you can't preview the sharpening effect. However, in Photoshop, you can preview sharpening at any magnification. You can also control how much sharpening to keep out of the shadows and the highlights, which is where problems tend to occur. And you can even isolate sharpening to certain areas of a composition. The special Photoshop techniques like high pass sharpening and sharpening using a luminosity layer are just not available in Lightroom, as is sharpening in lab or CMYK color mode. If lab or CMYK don't mean anything to you, then it probably just means that you don't actually need to know about them. So you probably don't need Photoshop, and you may find Lightroom is sufficient for your needs. So Lightroom and Photoshop are fundamentally different, and that's why I like to use both. I also work as a professional retoucher, and what I like about Photoshop is that when the automated tools are struggling, you can still go old school and really manually adjust a mask or a layer. But do you actually need Photoshop? Like I said at the beginning, it depends on your style of photography and your editing needs. For a lot of landscape photographers, I think that Lightroom may actually be the only software you need. Lightroom's big strength is that it's an all-in-one software, raw processing, photo library management, and output control all in one package. Photoshop, on the other hand, is the Swiss Army knife of pixel level editing. It's slightly more expensive to subscribe to both Lightroom and Photoshop, but I think the biggest hurdle to Photoshop is learning it from scratch if you're a beginner. It's quite a legacy software now, and compared to Lightroom, it's not very intuitive to learn, and there's probably a lot of stuff in there that you'll never even need or use. So it can be quite confusing to find your way around Photoshop when you're trying to get to grips with it. So what do you think? If you're using Lightroom, do you still actually need Photoshop? I'd be interested to know your views in the comments, or if you have any alternatives. Now, once again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.